Thank you, Andrew, and thank you to all of you for having me here this evening. It's always great to be in Nashua. I always enjoy coming to speak to the Nashua Republican City Committee, and the group seems to keep growing every single time I'm here. But I've actually been doing a lot of Nashua events today. Before I came here, I was taping the cable access TV show with Carl Seidel and Jennifer Horn, which will now be airing on cable TV for the next 8 months here and probably every other cable access TV show. And then I also did a brief cameo appearance on SMN this morning, only because Ed Stebbins called me in a panic and said Mark Hookson needed some help and some filler. So apparently I'm now the filler on SMN when anyone needs a guest to go on, but I was happy to do that for him as well. But like I said, it's great to be here, although in the interest of full disclosure, I do need to let you know that I spoke to the Belknap County GOP committee last night, and I commended them for holding their committee meetings at the Shanghai Chinese restaurant, and they fed the candidate as well there. So I'm not saying you all should move your meetings to the Lilac Blossom, but anyway, it is nice to be here, and I want to talk to you a little bit about why it is that I'm running for governor, but talk to you briefly somewhat about my background. My foray into New Hampshire politics began shortly after I graduated high school. I ran for the State House and was fortunate enough to be elected to a seat in the House of Representatives from the town of Londonderry, one of 7 seats there. And I served in the House for 1 term, 2 years. I was on the Judiciary and Family Law Committee. And it was a great experience doing that, although I gave myself a voluntary retirement after 1 term when I had a very quick lesson in economics. I couldn't survive on $100 a year, I figured out. And plus, I was putting myself through school at the same time. I was taking night classes at the University of New Hampshire in Manchester. And so after doing a stint in the State House, I went to work for former U.S. Senator Bob Smith and was his law enforcement and public safety liaison for 4 years on his official staff. And then you may remember Bob lost his re-election bid in 2002 to then Congressman Sununu. And so I went to work for Governor Craig Benson after that. And I served as Governor Benson's liaison to the Executive Council and also helped him make appointments to various boards and commissions in the executive branch, and worked for him for 2 years until he unfortunately lost his re-election bid to now Governor Lynch. And so at that point, I started to feel a little bit like the typhoid Mary of political campaigns. And plus, my wife and I were starting our family at the time. We moved to Litchfield, right down the river from here, in 2004. And it's where we've called home since that time. We have 3 young kids, Colby, who's age 7, Lindsay, who's 5, and Tommy, who's 3. And for those of you who have had little children or maybe have grandchildren, you'll appreciate this. Before I had officially announced I was running for governor, we were all riding in the car together. And I said to them, I said, so guys, Dad's thinking about running for governor. What do you think? And immediately my 5-year-old daughter says, I don't think so, Dad. And I was a little taken aback by this. And I said, I said, well, how come, Lindsay? And she says, because, Dad, I've seen you run, and I think there are others who can run faster than you. Point well taken. So now when I'm around them, I am officially walking for governor, because I clearly have a better chance if I do that than run for governor. But nonetheless, so after I had done a stint in Governor Benson's office, I was appointed to the Department of Health and Human Services, where I served under Commissioner John Stephen. And I was there for 4 years. 2 of those years, I was a deputy director for our Juvenile Justice Department. And I was there until the beginning of 2009, and then I did kind of a crazy thing. I say it was crazy because if you remember in 2008, the economy was collapsing at the time, and we had a lot of the banks that were being bailed out or going bankrupt altogether, and the economy wasn't doing well. And I had a great, secure, bureaucratic government job. Was making a very good salary and had the Cadillac healthcare benefit plan. But I decided to voluntarily leave my state job. And the reason I did that is because I was very concerned about the direction the state was going in. The Democrats had just won another landslide election in 2008, and we had seen the largest tax increases that the state has ever seen, the largest spending increases, and there didn't seem to be any credible, consistent conservative voice out there that was fighting for the things of limited government and less taxes and low spending. And so I went and took the executive director's position at Cornerstone, which was at the time kind of a marginalized nonprofit. It had very little funding, but I went in there with a plan and a vision for how we were going to be an effective organization and fight for good, sound, conservative policy. And really, the proof is in the pudding in the 3 years that I was there. We increased our membership from about 2,000 to 8,000 members by the time I left. Our revenue grew from a high watermark of about $100,000 when I went there to $1.2 million in 2010. And New Hampshire Business Magazine called us the most effective third-party organization in the state. So I'm very proud of the work that we were able to accomplish during my time there. But I stepped down from Cornerstone in this past October in 2011. And as I mentioned, I'm running for governor now. And that's what I want to talk to you briefly about tonight. So why run for governor? For me, it's very simple, and it's this. New Hampshire is in desperate need for a long-term plan, someone with a long-term vision for how we are going to be the most economically competitive state in the country over the next decade. We've been doing a lot of management by crisis over the last 8 years. We manage to the next budget. We're always managing what the next crisis is, but we're not thinking long-term, and we're not implementing real policies that are going to affect our economic climate for the positive in the long term. Everything from how we're going to create good, high-paying, sustainable jobs of the future, high-tech jobs, manufacturing jobs, good healthcare jobs, financial industry jobs, all jobs that are going to be sustainable and be around here for a long time. We have no long-term healthcare delivery plan, how we're going to deliver healthcare more efficiently and more cost-effective for the consumers. We don't have a long-term energy plan. We have some of the highest energy rates in the country. But again, it's because we haven't been managing this crisis for the long term. And we need to modernize state government. We're always consistently ranked the bottom of the barrel when it comes to efficiency in state government. And we've had no real modernization of state government in over 20 years. So we have a lot of challenges right now in the state in order to be the most economically competitive state. But I think if we have a governor who, number one, understands what those challenges are, and number two, is presenting bold and new solutions to how to meet those challenges, and number three, someone who has the background and experience of knowing how state government works and knowing how to get results and reforms in state government, we can be on the right track. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what I see as the biggest challenges that are facing us right now, what my solutions are, and how I think I'd go about implementing them. First off, you know, New Hampshire, we always talk about tax burden. And you always hear New Hampshire has a fairly good overall tax burden. And really, it's true. And we're about 44th in the country. Now, when I worked for Governor Benson, we're about 49th. But after 4 years of Democratic rule, we've slid down to 44th. But when you look at our corporate tax rate, and it's what most businesses look at, we're one of the worst in the country between our business profits tax and our business enterprise tax. Simply put, we're just not competitive right now in the region and in the nation. We tax businesses that don't even make a profit right now through the business enterprise tax. So you have small businesses and startup companies. Many startups, it takes a few years to finally start earning income and producing a profit, but we're taxing them right now. And that just isn't fair to be doing that. And the other thing we do is we over-regulate our small businesses. And I hear this from small business owners all the time. New Hampshire has a terrible regulatory environment. And part of that is because the administration that's in there right now, they look at the agencies as really fee collection agencies because they built up such a hole in the budget that they sent their agencies out to try to collect fees from small businesses by over-regulating them. So first, what I would say is we need to cut our corporate tax. We need to cut the business profits tax, and we need to reduce the business enterprise tax and completely eliminate the tax on businesses that aren't making a profit so that it will entice more entrepreneurs to start small businesses in this state. And also it gives some companies the flexibility of knowing that if the economy goes into a downturn and they stop making money, that we're not going to tax them as a state. The other thing we need to do is really get rid of a lot of the onerous regulations on small business right now. And I commend this current legislature for passing a bill to create a commission to look at all of the regulations on small businesses. And I would say let's implement 50% of them right off the bat to send a strong message to small businesses both here in the state but also outside of the state as well that New Hampshire is going to be a business-friendly state. You know, my philosophy is government doesn't create jobs, but government creates the atmosphere and the environment to entice the private sector to create those jobs. And I think that would be two strong signals: one, getting rid of a lot of the regulations, and two, lowering the corporate tax rate that would send the message to businesses that we want to be a business-friendly state. The second thing is we need to stop two mass migrations in this state. One is our young people. We are losing our young people in this state at an alarming rate. And you can see it in the census numbers from 2010. You know, we've got great schools, Dartmouth College and the Whittemore School of Business at UNH, St. Anselm College, Plymouth State College. Great schools in our state, but we're not keeping kids here once they graduate from those schools. And that's a problem for two areas. One is that, you know, as a state in 2010, we surpassed the state of Florida for median age. We have a higher median age in the state of Florida now. And what that means is our health care costs are going to continue to skyrocket the older our population gets. The other reason this is a problem is because when businesses look to either move here or to expand here, they want to know that they have a large labor skilled pool to take students from. And if they know that students, once they get their degree here, are moving out of state, well, it's not going to entice them and incentivize them to stay right here in New Hampshire. So we need to do a better job of keeping our young people here. And the way I see us doing that is using state government as a conduit between businesses and entrepreneurs and the universities, the community colleges, the trade schools, and to connect the two of them so that, one, the businesses can tell the universities and the schools where they need the skilled workers. You know, we should know where we need to put kids on a career path to so that they have a job when they're getting out of school. We need to give them a reality check when they're in high school to say, okay, if you're going to go and get a degree in, say, psychology, and you're going to go to a four-year institution and take out $150,000, $200,000 in loans, you need to know the reality of what it is you're going to have to pay back, but also what the market is like for psychology degrees. You know, and that you may only be able to get a job in social work, not that there's anything wrong with that, it's a very noble job, but maybe only making $20,000 a year. So we need to give them the reality of what it is that they're getting into, but also let's put them on a track to where the high-paying, you know, sustainable jobs of the future are, and connect them with those businesses that are creating those jobs. There's a lot of these good high-tech jobs that are being incubated right now in the Seacoast area and in the Upper Valley as well. But sad to say, some of them have actually moved down to the Cambridge area because they feel that the pool of skilled labor is a lot wider down there and that they can pull more students from that area. And so we need to do a much better job of connecting our students with these businesses and making sure that they know when they come out of school here in New Hampshire that they're going to have a job. We have a deficit in the trades area right now. And there's a lot of good, highly skilled trade professions, not like it was 40 years ago, but a lot of good, highly skilled jobs out there that we don't have enough people for that are paying $50,000, $60,000. Right when they get their license in these areas. So we need to do a better job at honing in on students' talents and making sure we're putting them on the right career path. The other area, the migration we need to stop, are the amount of people that have to commute out of state to go to work every day. And it's especially true in the southern area here. I mean, all you have to do is, you know, park yourself on the border of 93, 95, and Route 3 every day, and you can see all the New Hampshire plates that go into Massachusetts to find work. As a state, we're 49th in the country per capita of the amount of people that have to commute out of state every day to go to work, only behind or only in front of the state of Maryland. And of course, all of them go to our favorite place, Washington, D.C. But it's unfortunate that so many of our residents have to go to Massachusetts to find work because on top of that, they're paying Massachusetts income tax. My father's one of them. He's commuted every single day since they moved our family here in 1986 to Londonderry. He still commutes to Boston every day because he's never been able to find a comparable position paying what he gets paid in Massachusetts. And so one thing I would do as governor is be very aggressive about going into Massachusetts and talking with the CEOs of these companies and telling them why New Hampshire is where they should be doing business. Oh, and by the way, look at what we're doing in New Hampshire to make sure it's a business-friendly environment. We're cutting our corporate tax rate. We've got programs that are connecting businesses with our schools so that you have the type of skilled labor that you need. You know, wouldn't it be great if New Hampshire were not just the best place in the country to live, but was the best place in the country to work as well? And I've said I'd like to be Deval Patrick's worst nightmare by going into his state and shamelessly poaching jobs from Massachusetts and moving them to New Hampshire. And we should be doing that. We're not doing it aggressively enough right now. I would like a call list on my desk every week of the CEOs of these companies in the 128 corridor, the Burlington area where a lot of technology jobs are, to call them and say, hey, have you thought about moving to New Hampshire? Why or why not? And these are the reasons why you should be moving here. And it's something I would be very aggressive about. I also want to talk a little bit about modernizing state government because as I mentioned before, we are consistently ranked last in terms of how we do things here in the state. The example I always use is that you could start a small business right now in the state of Delaware from your laptop or your iPad, wherever you want. You go on right now and literally start a small business, fill out all the paperwork online, and get things rolling in the state of Delaware. You can't even start a business in New Hampshire from your laptop in New Hampshire right now because of how slow we do things and how bureaucratic our agencies are and how things are just not online right now in our state. So we really need to modernize state government and make it more efficient. One of the things that I did at juvenile justice when I first went there, I didn't know a whole lot about the juvenile justice system, but one of the first things I asked when I got there was, I said, what's the recidivism rate for our department? You know, how many kids are coming into the juvenile justice system that we are rehabilitating, sending back out, and they're getting returned to us? And nobody knew the answer to it. No one had the answer. I'm saying, how is it that we have a $30 million budget and we're funding all of these programs and we don't even know the efficacy of these programs? We have no metrics or data to go by to say these programs are working. So what I did is I went on the computer, went online, and I looked at all the juvenile justice agencies across the country to see if any of them were doing this. And sure enough, South Carolina, who actually was on probation from the feds at the time, came up with this taxpayer accountability report card where they measured the efficacy of all of their programs. And I said, we're going to copy this. This is a good idea. We're going to copy it and implement it in our department. And within a year, we had our first ever taxpayer accountability report card where we had all these different measurements of the programs that were being funded in the department. And it was a real wake-up call because for the first time ever, we also had a measurement of our recidivism rate. You know what it was? 40%. 40%. And my whole thing was, I said, you know what? And of course, you know, people get scared when you do this too because they think someone's going to get in trouble. The purpose of doing it for my sake wasn't to get anyone in trouble. I just wanted a baseline to know whether or not these programs were working or not so that we could find out which ones were working and which ones deserved to continue to be funded or which ones needed to be reformed or eliminated. But this was a good idea not only from a taxpayer accountability standpoint, but it was a good idea from a budgeting standpoint as well, because to me it makes for smart budgeting because you could go before the legislature and say, okay, here's the programs that are working and here are the ones that aren't working. And when you're thinking about making cuts, make cuts where the inefficiencies and the waste are. And I would do this across all of the departments. You know, I've always said I never always think it's fair if the legislature says, well, we're going to do 10% cuts across the board. Because if the Fish and Game Department is operating at, say, a 90% efficiency level, and HHS is only operating at 60%, well, why is it fair that they're taking the same whack? We should be going after the departments that aren't operating as efficiently. So as governor, I would say to my commissioners on day one, I'd say, okay, guys, look, we're all going to have a system of metrics in every department. We're going to have a system that measures the return on investment of all of the programs we're funding. And granted, all of the metrics would be different across each department because they all do different things. But at least now there would be much more transparency in how effectively our taxpayer dollars are being used. So I've gone through a lot of areas where I feel we have challenges that we need to face right now if we're going to be one of the most economically competitive states in the country. But I've also talked about my solutions too, and the third part of that, as I've said, is that we need someone that's got the background and experience of actually getting reforms and knowing how to do these things. Because it's one thing to have good ideas, and it's one thing to have a good philosophy of how government should be run, but you've got to know how to do it as well. And I feel that's what uniquely qualifies me, because as I mentioned, I've served in the legislature. I know how the legislative process works. I know as a governor, you have to work with the legislature. It's a give and take relationship. You can't just go in there and think you're a dictator and say this is the way it's going to be. It has to be a give and take relationship with them. I've served in the executive branch. I know what it entails. As I've said, I've helped make appointments to various boards and commissions, some of whom are actually still serving today under Governor Lynch. I've served in the state's largest state agency. I've made budget presentations before the legislature. I feel like I know where the good, bad, and ugly of state government is and what needs to be done on day one. And I have fought for sound policy in state government outside of state government as well. And so I feel I do have a record of getting these things done, these accomplishments that uniquely qualifies me for the position. Look, the governor's job, it's a two-year term. So there's not a whole lot of time for on-the-job training. You got to know what you're doing on day one when you go in there and how you're going to get it done. And I even know where the secret bathroom is in the governor's office, if that helps out at all. But anyway, with that, I will be happy to take any questions from you at all. And again, I appreciate you having me here this evening, and I'll open it up. Yes. Well, my feeling on education is this, is that we need a very simple education funding amendment that says the legislature is allowed to target aid to the communities that are in most need. I know there's different education amendments being brought forward at this time. I have a real problem with any wording that's going to codify the Claremont decision in any education amendment, and I don't think that ought to be the case. I think the amendment should be very simple and straightforward that allows the state, allows the legislature to target aid to the communities that most need it. And look, this is another failure of leadership on Governor Lynch's part. 8 years. He's been governor for 8 years. And hasn't fixed this problem. He ran on this when he ran for governor in 2004. And I know it very well because I was serving in the office of the person he beat, and he said he was going to fix the education funding problem. He has not fixed it. It's a failure of leadership, and we need someone to use the bully pulpit to say how we should be funding education properly in our state, and I think that is the way to do it. Yes, sir.
Hi. How would you be able to reel in DCYF from aggressively taking children?
Well, to answer your last question first, I mean, if we're taking time trying to determine what letters we should have on it, leave the letters the way they are. Okay, we've got enough big problems that we're dealing with than to be trying to change the letters on paperwork. With regard to DCYF, I know DCYF, the department, well from having worked closely with it through DJJS. And to the extent that if they're abusing their authority or overstepping their bounds, I will look at all of those cases very closely. And as governor, like I said, I know that business well. And I know the people that work there. And so I would have an interest in looking at each individual case if that was occurring in any instances. And then dealing with it appropriately. I mean, part of governing is managing well too. And again, I think this is an area where Governor Lynch has failed to lead. I don't think he's managed appropriately in many different areas. I'll give you an example. The Josiah Bartlett Center released a report recently that showed that in the last budget, the state paid out in personal mileage on state vehicles. The state paid 1.5 million miles in personal use on state vehicles. That is a gross negligence of any kind of management. You know, at our division, you know, we were one division within HHS, but we had a fleet management plan in our division to make sure all of our vehicles were being used properly, and that any vehicles which weren't being used, we sent back to the general pool of vehicles. But we were one division within a large agency. This needs to be happening agency-wide. There needs to be a proper fleet management plan so this kind of abuse and waste isn't occurring. But that's, frankly, in my opinion, where Governor Lynch has been asleep at the wheel. You know, we've all heard about the governor's 70% approval rating. Well, you know what? Being governor is not a popularity contest. It's about being a leader and making the right decisions for the state, even if it means ticking some people off every once in a while. And I'm not talking about being purposely antagonistic, but I'm talking about being a leader and making the right decisions. And that's something that the governor hasn't been doing. And I will tell you, it is something that the two folks seeking the Democratic nomination right now are not going to do either, because they were part of the problem. Both Jackie Silly and Maggie Hassan served in that legislature that had the largest spending increases and tax increases in our state's history. So they were part of the problem under Governor Lynch, and I will be more than happy to expose their record if I'm the nominee of this party. And you will have my commitment that I will go after them aggressively, because I know they're going to be coming after whoever our nominee is, especially if it's me. You better believe that I will expose their records to the people every chance I get. Thank you, Chuck. Yes, sir.
I'd like to first comment on your comments about overregulation. I have a small charitable trust that fill out an annual report every year.
Yeah, no, I think you're right about that, and I don't want to be dictating to the private universities what they have to do, but I will tell you, Northeastern University does their co-op. It's a 5-year program, and one of the years is spent doing an apprenticeship. It's very valuable because a lot of students actually find out through that when they get into whatever area they think they're going into, that after a year on the job in that area, they don't like it, but at least they have a chance at that point to change what their focus is. So I think that is a very valuable thing. I want to go back to your point on young people. This is a great place to raise a family. I mean, again, there are so many, we have a great quality of life here in New Hampshire, but I don't even think we market ourselves well enough to the rest of the country. And the example I use is, I'm sure many of you have seen the commercials that for the Gulf Coast that BP is mostly paid for. But I mean, who ever thought about taking a vacation to Mississippi or Alabama before those commercials? But they've done a nice job at selling those states. And the fact of the matter is that I think we could do a much better job at selling the state of New Hampshire. The fact of the matter is that we're the only state in New England that you can get to the mountains, real mountains, the seacoast, the rural areas in the west, and a major metropolis all within an hour. But we don't market the state well enough to folks outside of New Hampshire. And so I want to I want to stop the trend of young people leaving this state. And I think we can do that, but it has to start with making sure that they know they're going to have a good job once they come out of school here. Because they're in our schools, we just need to keep them here once they leave our schools as well. I want to make one other note. I hadn't talked about the issue of right to work. Comes up often. I support right to work. I voted for right to work. I voted for right to work before it was popular to vote for right to work. And that was in 1997. I was in a Republican majority legislature, and I was on the losing end. Even voting on it, we lost that vote in the House. And so we've made significant strides and significant gains in that area. But I was proud today to go up to the legislature and testify to the House committee in favor of right to work. I think would be a very good policy for our state to have. Di's giving me the 1-minute signal, so I think that we got time for maybe one more question.
I don't know if you know this, but New Hampshire is the 9th most densely populated state with veterans. Veterans make up 10% of New Hampshire's population, which is huge.
Yeah. I'll give you three quick things. First is on the issue with the hospital. And I've talked to Senator Ayotte about this, and I would push the congressional delegation hard on it if I became governor. It's very apparent we're not going to have a full-service hospital anytime soon in this state. So you know what? We ought to allow our veterans to use the hospitals in the areas where they live and have the federal government reimburse them for it. It's the right thing to do and the fair thing to do, and I would push the congressional delegation hard to make sure that happens. The second thing is we need to bring back the program in the Department of Employment Services that allows our veterans to have first preference when they're coming back from foreign lands to get a job here. We had that program in place for a while. It's my understanding we don't have that in place anymore. I would reinstitute it because I think they should get preference when they come back to make sure that they have a job when they come back to New Hampshire. And the third thing I would do is that I would create, and again, this wouldn't cost any new monies, but I would create a Veterans Department. We're one of the only states without an actual Veterans Department in the state that oversees all veterans affairs. Right now, it's very hodgepodge with the way things are done in different veterans activities. I would create an actual Veterans Department here in the state with the existing resources that we have to make sure that they are given the highest priority.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you all very much again, and look forward to it.